From a young age, I was taught that my smile was a tool of influence, that every step I took should be calculated, every word carefully polished, every appearance shaped to please everyone except myself. My name is Liora D'Emery, daughter of a lineage that for 3 generations has walked the halls of power as if they were invisible thrones. People called me a princess, not because I wore a crown, but because I was raised to embody an impeccable image of discipline, grace, and American nobility. And for a long time, I played that role to perfection. I knew how to smile for the cameras, how to answer questions with neutrality, how to keep my posture straight even when inside everything in me begged for freedom. But no one saw that. No one saw the girl behind the tailored dress. No one wondered what happened when the spotlights dimmed. I had become a frame, elegant, admired, but empty. And it was in that emptiness that one day something broke. Not with a crash, not with rebellion, but with a simple question that grew slowly and consumed me from within. What if I didn't want to be all this anymore? It was during an official visit, one of those labeled humanitarian action, that the crack opened. It was supposed to be just another donation drop-off, a photo session, a rehearsed speech about empathy and commitment. But something in that place disarmed me. Maybe it was the way people looked at me, not with adoration or automatic respect, but with distance, as if they knew I didn't belong and didn't bother pretending otherwise. For the first time, I felt unmoored, because there, my presence meant nothing. My surname, my smiles, my posture, all of it was irrelevant to people fighting for dignity every day. They saw me, yes, but they saw through me, and that's what drew me in. The way they didn't treat me as someone special, the way they didn't bow to the weight of my name, the way, in a quick, direct glance, they reminded me I was just a woman. And that, as painful as it was also the first spark of freedom I'd felt in my entire life. When I returned home that night, I sat before the mirror and stared at the image the world applauded. Perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, my grandmother's heirloom necklace, and my eyes empty. For the first time, I wanted to step down from the pedestal, not to hide, but to live, to truly live, without fear of disappointing, without needing to perform. I wanted to walk barefoot, hear stories without having to comment, embrace without being photographed. I wanted to exist outside the script, and in that moment I knew, even without knowing what I'd do, that something in me had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same. In the days that followed, I tried to ignore what had stirred in me during that visit. I dove deeper into the obligations of my impeccable routine, as if discipline could erase the unease growing in the center of my chest. My commitments multiplied. Interviews, speeches, campaign rehearsals for my father, charity events where everyone wore empathy like an accessory before returning to their expensive dinners, forgetting the names of those they helped. And I was there, smiling, signing, being admired. But inside, I felt absent, more and more. As if by repeating the same gestures and words, my soul was fading bit by bit, in a process so slow no one would notice, except me. And I noticed. Because every time my feet touched the cold marble floor of our ancestral home, I remembered the warmth of the packed earth in that village, and it made me ache. I began to see the world around me differently. Gala dinners felt theatrical, political smiles falser than ever. Discussions about social improvements in chandeliered halls started to feel offensive. And the scariest part was knowing I couldn't speak. Because in my family, disagreement was weakness, emotion was a threat, questioning was betrayal. But now, for the first time, I couldn't stay silent. I started going out alone, in secret, wearing clothes that didn't scream my surname. I returned to that community discreetly, telling myself it was out of humanitarian interest, but it wasn't. I went back because there, I didn't have to be perfect. No one cared if my voice trembled, if my hair wasn't neatly pinned, if I hesitated while carrying boxes, or if I stayed silent listening. They looked at me as if they expected nothing from me. And after a lifetime of being held to everything, that was a liberation that nearly brought me to tears. That's where I met Elias. He didn't recognize me, or pretended not to, which was even better. He was quiet, direct, with a steady gaze. He worked in community construction and always seemed exhausted, like someone carrying others' burdens, yet finding strength to keep going. At first, we barely spoke, but there was something in the way he looked at me, unhurried and unfiltered, that made me want to stay longer. Over time, he started talking, sparingly, but every word mattered. He shared stories of the neighborhood, of projects that never got funding, of friends who left too soon. And I listened like someone discovering a new world, or maybe the real one. The contrast between the life I led and the one he lived was stark, but necessary. Elias made me see. And seeing, I realized, is something you can't unlearn. One day, when I tried to explain who I was, he cut me off and said, "It doesn't matter what they say you are. It matters what you're doing here." That sentence burned into me like fire, because there, for the first time, someone saw me without the armor imposed on me, without the name, without the weight, just as Liora. And I began to wonder, what if that's all I was? If I left everything, the surname, the legacy, the invisible throne, and chose this place, these people, this life? The question still scared me, but it no longer seemed impossible. And that possibility, even if whispered, was stronger than any order I'd ever received. The day I was summoned to speak alongside my father marked, for me, the true end of everything I'd pretended to uphold. It was a public event, broadcast live, with flags raised, red carpets, and cameras pointed from every angle. One of those moments where every word is measured, every expression rehearsed, where everything must seem unshakable. I wore the outfit, chosen by my mother, recited the speech approved by the advisors, kept my chin high as I'd been taught since childhood. But inside, I wanted to scream, to say it was all a performance, that the words about connection with the people, active listening, and commitment to the humble rang hollow from mouths that had never stepped on dirt without shoes. I looked at my father during the event and, for a second, saw his pride. And that hurt more than it should, because he still believed I was the same, the public princess, the heir to the empire he'd built with such effort and rigidity. But I wasn't anymore. That night, back home, I went straight to my room, tore off the dress with anger as if it burned my skin, and cried with my face buried in my knees. It wasn't a cry of weakness. It was my body exploding after being compressed for so long. It was everything I'd held back surging without permission. I knew I couldn't go on, that this life, beautiful and secure on the outside, was suffocating me. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to admit it aloud. I whispered to myself, almost like a sacred secret, I don't want this anymore. 2 days later, I returned to the community, not to observe, nor to help as before. I went back like someone returning to a place where something was left, or maybe where something new was being born. Elias saw me arrive and asked nothing. He just offered a tired smile and a place beside him. We stayed there silent, working with our hands, sweeping the courtyard of a community center where children played freely. It was then I realized what I'd been seeking all along, belonging. And it wouldn't come from blood, titles, or applause. It would come from choosing to be there, to listen, to not run away. Later, he asked why I kept coming back, and I answered, for the first time with total honesty, because here, no one calls me a princess. He nodded as if understanding without needing explanation, and there, beside him, with the sun setting slowly, I felt my decision had already been made, even if I hadn't yet announced it to the world. Going back was more than a gesture, it was a rupture. Even if no one knew, even if my name still graced headlines with the same rehearsed pose, I knew that inside something had broken irreversibly. I started skipping official commitments with increasingly flimsy excuses. I began to stay silent under my mother's questions, to dodge the advisor's watchful gazes, to avoid the prepared speeches I'd always delivered with such elegance. Little by little, I stopped performing. And in the space left by the abandoned role, a version of me emerged, less polished, less admired, but infinitely more real. I spent hours in that community without noticing time pass. I worked alongside people who owed me nothing, and because of that, treated me with rare honesty. I helped carry construction materials, paint walls, serve food. Elias let me find my rhythm. He never praised me for doing the bare minimum, and I loved him for that, because I didn't want to be the exception, I wanted to be part. And in that simplicity, I found something I'd thought unattainable, the lightness of not needing to prove my worth. There were days I arrived exhausted from the outside world, from meetings, dinners, cold calls with my family, and a single glance from someone there, a greeting without protocol, a sincere gesture would ease my chest. I felt, with every fiber of my body, that this was where my soul began to breathe. But I also knew I was living as two versions of myself that couldn't coexist for long. The first crack came with an invitation, an engagement dinner. My parents had arranged it with their usual imposing elegance. The chosen groom, a promising politician, charming enough for the cameras, empty enough to be molded, smiled at me with the confidence of someone who thought he already owned me. I smiled back with the courtesy of someone who no longer belonged in that room. During my father's speech, as he spoke of legacy, union, and the bright future awaiting me, I looked around and felt there wasn't a single face there who truly knew me. Not even my own. That night, I wrote a letter, not to Elias nor to my parents, but to myself. I wrote that I couldn't live in silence anymore, that the D'Emery name had been a shield, but now it was a prison, that if loving meant breaking with the expected, then so be it. I wrote as if freeing myself, as if cutting my own invisible strings and leaping to learn how to fall, and maybe to fly. I knew the decision hadn't yet been revealed to the world, but inside, it was already final. I was no longer the princess of the American elite, and from that moment, everything that followed would be built with my own hands, even if dirty, even if trembling, but finally, mine. I began to fade from headlines gradually, as if my absence were just a temporary distraction from the public narrative. But at home, my absence was noise. My mother started looking at me as if trying to decipher a flaw in a piece of heirloom porcelain. My father, always more reserved, watched me with strategic distance, like someone calculating a threat before neutralizing it. They didn't ask directly, yet, but the tension was almost palpable. And every time I escaped to that community, I returned fuller of truth and less willing to perform. Elias, perceptive as always, began to look at me with a different kind of unease. I knew he felt my presence as something temporary, as if at any moment I'd be pulled back to my world, like a bird that landed in the wrong place. And maybe he was partly right, because even though I was decided inside, I hadn't yet broken the pact of silence with the world that raised me. I kept trying to be two opposites at once, the face of tradition and the body of revolution, until the first spark ignited where it always does, when women choose for themselves. In the media, a photo. Just one. Me sitting on a wooden bench, hair tied back carelessly, dressed like anyone else, hands dirty with paint, and a group of children laughing around me. Someone had posted it without malice, and the rest exploded. The next day, my name was everywhere. Not as a model of conduct, but as a scandal disguised as freedom. They began questioning my intentions, my sanity, my loyalty to my family. I saw my face plastered with words like rebellion, image crisis, threat to the legacy. And it was in that chaos that my father called me to talk, not as a father but as a patriarch. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words were surgical, delivered like a verdict. You need to remember who you are. And for the first time, I looked at him without fear and said, I'm doing exactly that. What followed was a silence between us that never quite mended. He understood. And so did I. From that moment, I ceased to be what they tried so carefully to preserve. I returned to the community that same day. Elias was there, waiting, and his eyes asked without words if I was still the same. I wasn't, and I was. I was, at last, just Liora. I stayed by his side until the sun set, in silence, while the world outside roared. For the first time, I didn't hide. I didn't protect myself. I didn't apologize. I just stayed. In that moment, I realized my choice was already public, but the freedom it brought me was deeply intimate, and no one, absolutely no one, could take that back from me. The hours after the uproar were intense, but they didn't break me. In fact, they only confirmed me. Elite friends called with a tone of concern, the kind that doesn't come from affection, but from fear that I might drag down the carefully crafted image of a respected name. They asked if I was okay, as if okay meant staying silent. They advised me to take a break, to lie low until it passed, but nothing in me wanted it to pass. Because for the first time, I wasn't being talked about. I was being heard, even by eyes that didn't understand me. My parents shut their doors, not with violence, but with a silence full of indignation. They canceled appearances, meetings, lunches. They left me alone with my decision. And oddly, that gave me strength. Because that loneliness was different from the one I'd felt for years surrounded by people. It was a true, clean loneliness where there was finally space for me. I began to live between two shores, the one crumbling behind me and the one I was still learning to build. Elias was my harbor in that gap, not with speeches or romantic gestures, but with presence. He didn't ask if I was right. He didn't press me with plans. He was just there. He offered a safe space to fall apart and, at the same time, to rebuild. One afternoon, as we washed paintbrushes side by side, he said, "They see you as a threat because you started living with truth, and truth always unsettles those who live by appearances." I held on to that like a secret weapon, not to attack, but to protect what was finally blooming in me. But not everyone was ready to welcome me. Some residents were wary. I became the target of whispers and sidelong glances. It was understandable. I carried the name of those who always promised but never delivered, the blood of those who always commanded without listening, and now I wanted to be there, as if the past hadn't left scars. No, I understood, and that's why I stayed. I kept coming back, day after day, without demands, without haste, without needing to prove anything, just being, showing I didn't want to lead. I wanted to contribute. And little by little, the ice broke. Smiles came. Sincere requests for help came. Stories came. And with them, the belonging I never found in ballrooms or podiums. It was there, among calloused, hands and frank conversations that I realized my revolution didn't need shouts. It was born from the silence I finally claimed, no longer as a princess, but as Liora, whole, present, transformed. The world didn't change overnight when I chose to stay. The structures that shaped me stood as solid and cold as ever. My name was still whispered in gilded halls with restrained indignation. Gossip columnists kept speculating about my phase, as if courage were a detour. But something had changed, irreversibly, me. For the first time, I was where I wanted to be, with who I wanted to be, living days that needed no approval, applause, or record. I started working full-time on local projects, small renovations, reading groups, rebuilding abandoned spaces. People no longer looked at me with the distance they once did. Some still kept a silent caution, but most began to include me as if I'd always belonged. And the truth is, in some way, I always had. I just didn't know. The dirt on my feet, the sweat on my back, the real weight of things, it all grounded me. Every gesture, every unpracticed smile, every shared silence in the hot afternoons beside Elias did more for me than all the speeches I'd ever recited for cameras. Elias himself changed over time. He spoke more, laughed more easily, called my name like it was music. One day as we walked home, he said, "You didn't step down from a throne, you jumped off a cliff." And then he smiled, as if saying it wasn't an accusation, it was admiration. And I knew in that moment there was no going back. Not because I'd lost my place of origin, but because I'd finally found my true place. My father never reached out, not directly. But a letter arrived, brief, cold, a reminder of what I'd left disguised as concern. He didn't use words like disappointment or shame. He was too skilled for that. But every sentence was an attempt to pull me back, not with affection, but with guilt. I burned the letter in the community center's sink alone. And as the flames consumed those empty words, I realized something in me was also being set free, because I no longer needed his forgiveness, nor his pride. I just needed to keep going. Today, my life isn't extraordinary. There are no flashes, no carpets, no tailored dresses, but it's mine. The days are simple and full. My name no longer fills columns, but my steps fill the ground I'd watched from above for so long. And if there's anything I've learned, it's that the truest nobility doesn't come from blood or surname. It comes from the courage to abandon everything that defines you on the outside, to finally live what pulses within. I'm no longer introduced with reverence. No one stands when I enter a room. People don't hold their words in my presence anymore. And oddly, that's exactly where I found my royalty. Today, I wake to the smell of simple coffee, the sound of real voices, hands that work, and hearts that share. I'm no longer the heir to a political lineage. I'm the fruit of what I chose to build, step by step, outside the halls that shaped me. Sometimes people ask if I regret what I left behind. And I smile, because what I left wasn't mine. It was the version they invented of me, the one that gave me power, but stole my voice. Today, I'm Liora, just that. And that's everything. Because being just, being whole, without script, without masks, is the noblest choice anyone can make.